Louisville, Kentucky, located in Jefferson County, lies northwest of Lexington along the Ohio River Falls. The beautiful waterfalls have since the earliest days attracted millions of residents to the area. The earliest were Native American tribes, predominantly the Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Shawnee. Most of these tribes were eliminated from Kentucky by about the early 1800s, either through warfare or resettlement to other territories by the federal government. Louisville was founded in 1778 by George Rogers Clark, making it one of the oldest cities west of the Appalachian Mountains. It's named after King Louis XVI of France. The city is home to the historic Kentucky Derby. Every May, its racecourse, Churchill Downs, hosts the renowned horse race, whose long history is explored at the Kentucky Derby Museum. The University of Louisville and the Louisville Cardinals dominate local athletics, and baseball is celebrated at the Louisville Slugger Museum and Factory, where Major League Baseball bats are produced. Louisville is also the hometown of legendary boxer Muhammad Ali, and of course, the birthplace of Kentucky Fried Chicken. In April of 1952, Brenda Sue Schaefer was born in Louisville's St. Anthony's Hospital. She came from a large German Catholic family that had been in St. Matthews and Jefferson County for 3 generations. St. Matthews is a small town on the eastern edge of Louisville with a population of about 15,000. The name St. Matthews was adopted in 1850 after the completion of St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, the area's first. It became the official name of the community in 1851 when the newly opened U.S. Post Office adopted it. Later, many other Protestant churches were founded, including Baptist and Holy Trinity, the oldest of the 3 Catholic churches in the city, which was completed in 1882, following immigration to the area of Catholics from Switzerland and Germany. Brenda Schaefer was the beloved baby sister of 6 children. She had 4 brothers and 1 sister who was 13 when she was born, and Carolyn was delighted to finally get a little sister. The family called her Mom's Shadow. She had helped ease her mother's sorrow at having a stillbirth not long before. As a Catholic, she could not have labor-induced even though she knew the child she carried was already dead. That was considered abortion. Instead, she gave birth to a decomposed fetus at home. Baby girl Brenda was the balm her mother's soul needed and became the light of her life. At the time of her death, she was living at home to take care of her mother, who was ill with lupus. Brenda was a shy little girl, avoided confrontation, and wanted everybody to be happy. Even in high school, she was never really a partier. In 1968, at 16 years old, she was a beautiful brunette, olive-skinned with very large brown eyes. But she was self-conscious, always finding fault with her looks. That's when she met Pete Van Pelt, who was 19 and who would be her only high school boyfriend. He would possessively consume her last 2 years in high school. He proposed her senior year. The two planned a wedding shortly after Brenda's graduation. Though her family tried to counsel her to wait, she wouldn't. She dreamed of a big German Catholic wedding with a band. But on May 2nd, Brenda's brother Jack, who was a police officer, was brutally murdered in the line of duty. The Schaefer family was understandably shaken, and the end of Brenda's senior year was filled with gloom and sadness at the loss of her brother. Brenda and Pete postponed the wedding, but only until the following December. The young couple had the problems many face. They argued often about money. But Brenda was also inexperienced, and Pete would later say she was very sexually inhibited, while Brenda later told friends that she didn't like Pete's approach to sex. She also put it more discreetly or delicately by saying that their needs were just different. Whatever the reason or combination of reasons, the financial strain did the couple in. Though Pete Van Pelt accused his wife of being materialistic, he was actually the impulse buyer in the marriage. Brenda and Pete divorced, despite the strong misgivings from her very Catholic father, who thought she should stay and work it out. Their divorce was final in March of 1976, and by June she had retaken her name and was Brenda Sue Schaefer once again. And she was ready to move on with her life. But by many accounts from friends and family, Brenda remained an innocent, naive woman. She tended to stay in long relationships, though she shied away from marriage. By the time she was 36 years old, she had finally accepted a proposal. But it was from a man who would always rub her friends, family, and co-workers the wrong way. A 50-year-old man named Ignato. On September 25, 1988, the St. Matthews police requested help from Jefferson County on a missing person. Brenda Schaefer's white Buick was found abandoned on I-64 going through St. Matthews. One of the rear tires was flat and the car had been broken into and ransacked. St. Matthews detective Jim Ennis asked for help because there was blood dripped over the back seat and on the outside of the car. He had a bad feeling about this. This wasn't just a missing person. Jefferson County Detective Jim Wesley took the call and agreed to come right away. He would remain the lead detective in Brenda's case. When officers went to check on Brenda, they found that though she had her own condominium, she lived with her parents. As I said before, she had moved home to help when her mother Essie became ill with lupus. The police collected recent photographs and found out that Brenda usually wore about $30,000 worth of jewelry. Diamond rings, earrings, and a bracelet, and a gold chain. That's about $65,000 in 2018 money. They immediately questioned Brenda's fiancé, Melvin Henry Ignato. He was the last person to see her alive, and he also called the police to report her missing. He said the couple had spent most of that Saturday together, and Brenda left around 11:30 that night to return home. It was only a 15-minute drive, and when she never showed up, her mother called Mel at 3 a.m. asking where her daughter was. Brenda's mother said Mel Ignato seemed surprised at her call, insisting that Brenda had left at 11:30 p.m. And though she was concerned, she decided to make light of the situation. She later said she knew Brenda wanted out of the relationship with Mel because she wanted to get back together with an old boyfriend named Jim Rush, a dentist in Louisville. Essie Shaffer was afraid her daughter was with the ex-boyfriend and didn't want to create drama with Mel. Honestly, she hoped her daughter was with Jim Rush. The Shaffer family didn't like the older, overbearing Mel Ignato. They were anxious for Brenda to get rid of him, and they knew she planned to. Essie Shaffer hung up, but Mel called her back at 4 a.m. asking if Brenda was home, and she lied and told him that she was. Mrs. Shaffer said Mel seemed incredulous and said, "Are you sure?" She curtly told him yes and hung up the phone. So then Mel called Sandy Shaffer, Brenda's sister-in-law, crying and saying he was worried about Brenda. He then called the St. Matthews police and reported his fiancée missing. Her family had good reason to dislike Mel, though they all might not have known how bad he was. Brenda's brother Tom had a longtime girlfriend named Linda Love who was very close to Brenda. Brenda had told her a terrifying story of a time when she and Mel were in Gatlinburg, Tennessee for a long weekend, and she woke up to him standing over her with a cloth soaked in chloroform. He told her he had just wanted her to relax and sleep well. But she was frightened and packed her bags and then took off walking. Mel caught up to her and convinced her to come back and finish the vacation. But she was now ready to end things when she got home. The Friday night before she disappeared, Brenda talked to Linda Love on the phone and sounded scared. She said she thought Mel had followed her home. Linda made her promise she was going to end things, and Brenda swore she was going to end it the next night, Saturday, the night she vanished. Linda had promised she wouldn't tell Brenda's brother, but Brenda had actually told her mother about the incident, and that she was afraid to break up with Mel. But she did want to give him back the jewelry he had gifted her and be respectful, even though she was frightened. Her best friend Joyce Smallwood and co-workers also confirmed this. Essie Shaffer told her daughter to do it at the house, thinking he wouldn't try anything there. But Brenda went on to meet her fiancé on her own anyway. She probably didn't want her parents to witness a scene. Or maybe she knew Mel would never agree to come to her parents' home. Now, The Schaefers gathered at the house, shocked and numb, each of them having different reasons for hating Mel Ignato. Mel Ignato, by all accounts, was not really that likable of a guy. Standing 6 feet 5 inches tall and weighing less than 200 pounds, he was awkwardly lanky and seemed uncomfortable in his own skin. That discomfort translated into overcompensation and obnoxiousness. He was able to fool some people that those traits were actually confidence and affability. He was well respected at his job. He was a senior buyer for an Asian import-export company called Rizalco. When Mel showed up at the family home that Sunday in the wake of Brenda's disappearance, things were more than uncomfortable. They said he went from being composed to almost hysterical as they watched him, finally just weeping incessantly. When they couldn't take it any longer, Brenda's brother Mike told Mel he needed to calm down because he was upsetting their mother. Then Linda Love heard him say that she was dead. Another family had been insisting that she was kidnapped and would come back soon, and they just needed to keep the faith. But Mel kept saying, "No, she's dead." At this, Linda pulled Tom aside and said they were going to the police. They went straight to Detective Wesley, and Linda told him all the awful things Brenda had confided in her. At this point, 4 different agencies were involved in the investigation. Besides the St. Matthews Police and Jefferson County that they had called for help, Oldham County, where Mel had a boat docked, was also involved, and the FBI were waiting on the sidelines in case Brenda Schaefer had been taken over state lines. But their involvement in the case would be significant until the very end. The detectives had already asked the Oldham County Sheriff's Office to check Mel's boat for any sign of Brenda, but there was none. The FBI contacted Mel's ex-wife. Sharon Kippen Ignato had actually remarried and left Louisville, but she gave them a 12-page statement on her ex-husband's proclivities. Sharon was also a petite, attractive brunette. She even bore a small resemblance to Brenda. Friends also say she had a very compliant personality, much like Brenda as well. Sharon had married Mel in 1960, and she left in 1973. Though she had wanted full custody of their 3 children, she didn't get it. She also didn't get the house or a financial settlement. She basically walked away with her car, her clothes, and a pittance in alimony. For a man to gain full custody of the children in 1973 already raised flags. It was very unusual for the time, and the picture Sharon painted of her ex-husband was brutal. He wasn't just self-centered or dominant. He was controlling to the point of punishing his wife with anal sex if she made some sort of household mistake in his mind. He was never affectionate to Sharon or the children and kept complete financial control. Always a cheapskate, he made his wife and kids shop at Kmart and penny-pinched every detail of their home life. But for himself, he wore designer suits, a lot of gold, and a diamond pinky ring. He was even more of a flashy man by the time he was with Brenda, driving a Corvette, taking much pride in his boat, the Motion Lotion, and even spending $25,000 just to upgrade his bathroom. Mel Ignato was a man with expensive tastes. He was a successful buyer for his company Rizalco for 23 years. In the 80s, his salary, with bonuses and commissions, ranged between $50,000 and $80,000 a year. Not a shabby salary by today's standards anyway, but it equates to $130,000 to $200,000 in 2018 dollars. But it was never enough. He never thought he was rich enough. Maybe that's because he grew up an average, lower-middle-class kid in Louisville in the 1950s. At that time, Louisville was still very segregated, not just by color, but by class, specifically old money. If you didn't have family money, you were a nobody. In high school, Mel ran track, had a few close friends, and only dated a little. He was considered a bit of a nerd with his lanky height and glasses. His mother was a registered nurse, but his father, once a reporter, had tried several failed business ventures, including a grocery store that the family lived in the back of. Mel Ignato was a scrawny C student without family money. His father filed for bankruptcy a few times, once not long after they had bought a nice home in town, throwing the family into a crappy apartment, much to his son's embarrassment. So Mel Ignato grew up wanting money and resenting people who had it. By Monday morning, Brenda had not shown up for work. She worked at a clinic for a doctor named William Spaulding. She had been with Dr. Spaulding for 12 years, kind of falling into the medical profession after taking a 6-week nurse's aide program while she was still married to her first husband. She worked in the clinic as an aide and an x-ray technician and was beloved by the staff and patients alike. She often worked 12-hour shifts alongside the doctor, who had one of the largest family practices in the area. And in her off time, she would often visit his elderly patient in rest homes. To say everyone loved Brenda Schaefer would be putting it mildly. She wasn't just beautiful, she was kind and thoughtful. She was generous with her time and always cheerful, and her boss was very protective of her. As soon as the detectives arrived to question the staff, Dr. Spaulding declared, quote, "Mel Ignato is responsible for this. I know he is. I know the bastard did it." Dr. Spaulding and Brenda's co-workers knew quite a lot about her relationship with Mel. The doctor told detectives that he had drugged Brenda and photographed her while she was nude and unconscious. He even said that Brenda told him that Mel had been involved in producing pornography in college, though this was never substantiated. Dr. Spaulding would never rest in his quest to find Brenda and later to see that Mel Ignato paid for what he did. Detectives also talked to Joyce Smallwood, Brenda's best friend. The women had bonded early over painful divorces and being new to the Louisville single scene. Joyce told the detectives about Brenda's self-esteem issues. She just never thought she was pretty enough. Though she had a beautiful figure, she would wear shorts over a swimsuit. She had also paid for cosmetic surgery on her nose and had breast augmentation. Joyce was the one who introduced Brenda and Mel when she asked her to go on a double date with one of Mel's friends. At the time, Brenda was trying to end a long-term relationship with Jim Rush. Though she loved him, she thought he smoked and drank too much, often embarrassing her with his public drunkenness. She had finally reached a point where she was ready to settle down and just didn't think Jim had the qualities of a good husband. Unhappy that her relationship with Jim was failing, she threw herself into a new relationship with Ignato, perhaps rushing things where before she had always been cautious. Later, Mel would often portray Brenda as a gold digger, but friends disagree, as she had her own money, plenty in savings and retirement. She owned her own condo. She had a good job. I think it's more likely that she thought Mel was just more stable. He was older, had children, and was definitely interested in her. She always thought Jim Rush took her for granted. But Mel Ignato showered her with attention. But she soon found that attention suffocating. She obviously had confided this to many, many people in her life. But oddly enough, she did accept an engagement ring from Mel on Valentine's Day in 1987. I think it is safe to say that Brenda Schaefer was caught up in an emotionally abusive, coercive relationship. She had been compliant with men since her first husband, though she did usually find the strength to walk away. Mel Ignato would prove to be much harder to walk away from. But it's clear from what her friends and family say that she was indeed ready to walk away. She said Mel repulsed her. She confided to Joyce that he was obsessed with anal sex and also constantly talked to her about trying group sex. He was very controlling, calling her at work up to 3 times in a day. She told Joyce, quote, "It's like he wants to own me, body and soul." And every time she tried to leave, he would cry and blame her for the relationship problems, insisting that she was frigid. He even blamed her when he lost his job at Rosalco. He was a master manipulator, and somehow he always talked her into staying. But in the weeks before her disappearance, Brenda had begun seeing Jim Rush again. She had never stopped loving him, she had just wanted him to change. And now he seemed willing, and she felt hopeful about their relationship again. But she had to end things with Mel, and she was growing increasingly scared of him, convinced he followed her home from work. She was paranoid all the time. And just the night before her disappearance, she promised her brother's girlfriend, Linda Love, that this time she was going to break it off for good. Joyce Smallwood had told Detective Jim Wesley that they should talk to a woman named Mary Ann Shore. She was a former girlfriend of Mel's. Wesley and 2 FBI agents made a surprise visit to Mary Ann on Tuesday, 2 days after Brenda had gone missing. She told them that Mel had never been possessive or violent, but that she had broken off the relationship when it became clear he would not marry her. She had met Mel when she became his live-in babysitter after his first divorce in 1973. She said that she ended the relationship in 1984, though they did occasionally still see each other. The detectives got a weird vibe from Mary Ann Shore. She swore that she and Mel had a normal sex life and that she hadn't seen him since the previous April. Wesley did not believe her. He wasn't sure why, but he believed she was protecting Mel. So the detectives began investigating Mary Ann Shore alongside Ignato. Not long after talking to Mary Ann, they got that long statement from Mel's ex-wife Sharon. A picture of the real Mel Ignato was forming, and the FBI brought a lot to the table when it came to understanding the man. Roy Hazelwood from the Behavioral Science Unit at the FBI was giving them characteristics of a sexual sadist, especially one that may graduate to murder. He told investigators that he was certain that if Mel Ignato had murdered Brenda Schaefer, he would have filmed it or photographed it. Men like that always took trophies, mementos, anything to help them relive the act. That prediction would become hauntingly true in Brenda's murder. By Thursday, detectives were questioning Mel again, now in the presence of his attorney, Charlie Ricketts. Mel at times sobbed uncontrollably, prompting investigators to give him times to get himself under control. And then he would swing back coolly and point the finger at other people as possible suspects. Especially Jim Rush, who he characterized as a drug addict, and also Brenda's ex-husband, Pete Van Pelt, whom he said had never gotten over Brenda and had in fact been following her. It really didn't matter who Mel tried pointing the finger at. The detectives had honed in on him from the beginning. He was under surveillance, and by Monday, October 3rd, detectives went to Brenda's brother Tom and asked if he would go see Mel and wear a wire. Tom immediately agreed. He was nervous and asked for direction, but he was told to just behave naturally, to say anything that came to mind, especially anything that might provoke Mel. The men met for drinks at a restaurant, and Mel Ignato spent most of the time talking about himself and how Brenda's disappearance was affecting his life. He continued slinging accusations at Jim Rush and Pete Van Pelt, and even went so far as to say that Brenda had enemies at work, something her brother knew to be ridiculously untrue. But he kept meeting Mel for a period of 5 weeks. At the last meeting, it went from bad to worse when Mel suddenly pulled out a piece of paper listing Brenda's assets. As her brother sat there seething, Mel went through the list, explaining how Brenda had told him that she wanted certain things to go to her mother and friends. But of course, he wanted all of the jewelry back that he had given her. Quickly adding, well, you know, if they never find the stuff and it's turned over for the insurance money. Tom left the restaurant shaking with murderous rage. He was done trying to get Mel on tape. And by mid-November, Mel was already dating again, and Brenda's case had gone ice cold. Tom wasn't the only one feeling rage towards Mel Ignato. Dr. Spaulding, Brenda's boss, could not let it go. He contributed to the $25,000 reward for her safe return, but that just wasn't enough. He was actually afraid of Mel, arming his receptionist and himself with guns. Finally, in desperation, he sent Ignato an anonymous death threat. He was quickly found out, and he admitted what he did. Even with a threat of a $5,000 fine and a year in prison, to which he sarcastically replied, "I could use the rest." Mel Ignato, however, wanted to take this to trial, so they did. But in doing so, he put himself on the witness stand. Unfortunately, he performed well. Dr. Spaulding was found guilty, but not sentenced to jail time. He only paid a fine. But it did get prosecutors thinking. If Mel Ignato was bold enough to get on the stand once, maybe he would again. In August of 1989, a grand jury was convened. And though they were right and Mel did get up to testify, it did little good. He denied everything, and with no body or any physical evidence, the grand jury could not indict him. But he was on record lying. Keep that in your back pocket. Of course he lied about his involvement, but he also said Brenda and Mary Ann had never even met. Mary Ann's testimony before the grand jury was bizarre. She came to court in an eye patch, speaking gibberish, and had a doctor's note saying she suffered from Bell's palsy. A doctor would testify that even if she suffered from that disease, it would not affect her speech that way. Though she eventually dropped the act, she denied all involvement and agreed that she had never met Brenda Schaefer. By February of the next year, some 15 months after Brenda's disappearance, detectives were leaning hard on Mary Ann Shore. They finally had gotten more information on her from friends, specifically that Mel had paid for her to have 2 abortions while they were together, that she was obsessed with Mel and jealous of his ex-wife, and especially Brenda. They knew he still slept with her during his relationship with Brenda. Mary Ann Shore was an enigma, and they thought she was the key to breaking the case. In the months since Brenda's disappearance, Mel was no longer paying her any attention. He had joined Southeast Christian Church and began seeing women in a singles group there, so Mary Ann had reluctantly moved on. Detective Jim Wesley shouted at her when questioning her, purposely trying to intimidate her. They understood now that she was more than likely a compliant victim of Ignato's, and they thought they could break her. She agreed to a polygraph, which she failed. She then, like Tom, agreed to wear a wire. But she was nervous and thought Mel would know. She backed out and the police watched her. And then they caught her in a lie. She was still in contact with Mel, despite insisting she hadn't seen him since the April before. The police got lucky because Mary Ann had written some bad checks. So they swooped in and arrested her right in front of Mel. She got a lawyer named Jack Ignato, who was a bit shocked at the response to a few bad checks. The detectives let him know what they were really after. By then, Mary Ann had a new boyfriend. But despite the new boyfriend, she did admit that she still occasionally slept with Mel, though he refused any kind of emotional relationship with her. Again, this woman perplexed investigators, though FBI agent Hazelwood was pretty convinced she was a compliant and willing partner of Mel's. To him, she was the classic partner for a sexual sadist. Jack Ignato finally convinced Mary Ann to talk. He told her she could be charged for murder or as an accomplice after the fact. She then said the magic words, "Suppose I know where the body is buried." Now that they had Mary Ann Shore, the police and FBI were not playing around. They arranged for her house to be wired for audio and video footage and told her to call Mel. She still had a connection to him. At the very least, they knew Mel believed he still controlled her. Maybe they could use that. Prosecutor Ernie Jasmine had sent an assistant district attorney to talk to Mary Ann's lawyer because he was in court. Assistant DA John Stewart approved a deal with Mary Ann. She would plead to tampering with evidence, a Class D felony, in exchange for leading investigators to Brenda's body and trying to get Mel Ignato on tape. Many people involved with the investigation were not happy about this deal, including Ernie Jasmine, who reamed his assistant over it. But Stewart convinced him that they could get Mary Ann on tape too, catching her in a lie and still go after her. It reminds me of the way people felt about Canadian Karla Homolka's deal. Known as the deal with the devil, the Canadian government had given her a sweetheart deal before they really knew how involved she was in the crimes of her husband, serial rapist and sadistic murderer Paul Bernardo. There are many similarities to my mind, especially when even prosecutor Ernie Jasmine finally agreed with Stewart, saying, quote, "Sometimes it takes the little devil to get to the big devil." At the time, they couldn't know how much she was involved, but she did convince many investigators. She only gave a brief description initially, but she said on record that Mel Ignato had brought Brenda Schaefer to her house, raped and tortured her before killing her and burying her in Mary Ann's backyard. She then said, quote, "I'm afraid Mel's going to kill me." But she agreed to go along with their plan. After the FBI had fully wired her home, she led them to a spot in the backyard, and after shuffling around in the dead leaves, pointed to a place in the ground and indicated that that was where Brenda's body was. The detectives placed an old can on the spot and said, "Okay, let's go call Mel." Mel Ignato was no fool. He immediately refused to come to Mary Ann's home, saying he would meet her in their usual spot. It was an ice cream parlor a few miles north of her home. He definitely didn't want to talk on the phone either. Now investigators had to scramble and wire Mary Ann's body. All this work to set up the house had been for nothing. Mel wasn't coming, and now they literally had minutes to get Mary Ann ready for their meeting. She met Mel at the ice cream parlor, and in a 13-minute conversation, the tape of which would cause much controversy later, she never once got him to say Brenda's name or anything about the murder or cover-up. Mostly, Mel ranted and raved at Mary Ann the whole time, especially when she admitted she had spoken to the FBI. He told her to let him handle things, that she didn't have to talk to anybody, that they didn't have anything on him. But he carefully never said the magic words, though he did dance around them. Mary Ann's home had been a rental, and the owner had recently sold it. When she reminded him of this, he said, "So? They'll probably just put a parking lot or a warehouse there." "Don't get rattled," he screamed at her. "I don't care if they tell you they're going to dig down 8 feet, the whole damn length of the property." This technically did not come close to an admission, though everyone knew what he was really talking about, and his anger and rage were palpable. After the failed recording, investigators took Mary Ann back to her apartment to get a formal statement. She immediately shocked them by saying Brenda's grave had been dug the August before she went missing on September 24th, long before her murder, and Mary Ann had helped Mel dig it. She got the feeling that he wanted to use her jealousy of Brenda to involve her in his sadism. She said, quote, "He wanted to perform sexual things on her, and he wanted me to get involved with it. At first, I was going to, and the more I thought about it, I didn't want to get involved at all. I didn't even want to be there." Mary Ann Shore gave explicit details of Brenda's long torture. She said that Mel brought Brenda to her house under the guise of showing her jewelry. Once she walked in, Mary Ann locked the door behind her. She told detectives that Mel had tied Brenda to the coffee table and raped her annually. She kept saying this word instead of anally, which the detectives found strange, but her details were so specific. She said after the coffee table, he moved Brenda to the bedroom and tied her up. I'm not going to go into all the graphic detail, but I will give you a list of the items that Mel Ignato brought to torture Brenda Schaefer with. He brought black garbage bags, duct tape, clothesline rope all cut into exact lengths. He brought an Olympus 35mm camera, a white dildo, KY jelly, work gloves, a wooden fraternity paddle, and a bottle of chloroform. Brenda Schaefer suffered greatly, physical pain and humiliation. And Mary Ann did take part, though we only have her word for how much she participated. At least at that point they only had her word. She did say she photographed the whole thing at Mel's direction. He told her to make sure his face wasn't in the pictures, and she described every picture she took. By now, the FBI had begun digging, but they hadn't found Brenda's body where Mary Ann said it would be. But somehow, the media had gotten wind of what was happening. Investigators were worried that Mel would run. They made a snap decision to go ahead and arrest him, even without the body. And Mary Ann had no idea where the photographs were. She said Mel took everything with him after he killed Brenda. She claims she was not in the room, but did help him wrap the body and bury it. The decision to arrest Mel Ignato when they did would be heavily criticized. Why didn't they wait for the body? I think it's obvious, and I understand completely, but hindsight is 20/20, and people do like to point fingers. One FBI agent later said that if it was his case, he would have made Marianne try again with the wire, that they needed a confession on tape or some sort of admission. With no luck digging where Marianne had instructed, the detectives brought in a cadaver dog. He soon hit on one spot. And then they found her. Her body was badly decomposed and was tied into a tight fetal position. The medical examiner would not be able to recover any physical evidence from her body. After 15 months, it was just too late. But at least now, the Schaeffers could lay their daughter and sister to rest. They were able to positively identify her through dental records, but they also cut off her hands to send to the FBI for fingerprinting. This would be a deeply troubling detail for the family. After the trial, Mike and Tom Shaffer asked for her hands back. They had them cremated and asked the family priest to bury them near her body. There was another part of the autopsy that was troubling. Brenda's body showed signs of a hysterectomy. Her family was shocked. She had not told anyone, and in fact, her work record didn't even show that she had taken any significant time off for the procedure. But I do think it might explain one thing about Brenda. Her ex-husband had also characterized her as frigid. It was a hurtful thing to say before she died, and even worse after she died, as it aligned with what Mel Ignato had said about her. Her friends explained that she had suffered from severe menstrual problems for years. It's possible she suffered from endometriosis or another gynecological disorder causing these symptoms. And along with painful periods, sexual intercourse is often uncomfortable for those suffering with these issues. Perhaps Brenda was sexually inhibited, but perhaps it was also physically painful. We can't know. But along with her cosmetic procedures, it would seem she was trying to take control of her body. It was a secret she didn't even share with her closest friends, so maybe she was ashamed of it. With every sad detail of this case, this part breaks my heart just a little deeper. I think Brenda had been so misunderstood, as well as mistreated by the men in her life. Like it or not, they now had to get Melvin Ignato to trial. It would take 38 months. And during that time, both of Brenda's parents would die, as would her ex-boyfriend and the man she had hoped to reunite with, Jim Rush. One of the very first stumbling blocks was when the tape of Marianne and Mel was put into the public record. This happened after Ignato's lawyer, Charlie Rickett, filed a motion for discovery. He could have had all the discovery items sealed. Even the judge, Martin Johnstone, was caught off guard by this. No one had ever heard of an audio tape getting in the hands of the public so quickly. Prosecutor Ernie Jasmine was defensive about it later, saying it was improper not to have asked for the evidence to be sealed. The very day it was released, he was in court arguing not to place it into evidence during a suppression hearing due to the inflammatory nature. Then all of a sudden, it hit the press. And Charlie Rickett, Ignato's attorney, had a field day raging about a tainted jury pool. He now demanded a change of venue, and naturally, he got one. In Covington, Kentucky, located in Kenton County. Many feel that this was an egregious error and is what sunk the case. But frankly, many trials are moved due to pretrial publicity. It's obvious to me that this would have happened anyway, despite the tape. The public was outraged by Brenda Schaefer's murder. They were already against Mel Ignato and sympathetic to the Schaefer family. I'm not sure that keeping that tape from public domain would have changed anything. Kenton County was 97% white. Covington, the county seat, was notoriously segregated, even in the early 90s. Bill Martin, a black community leader in the area, said, quote, that for jurors to see a black prosecutor there would be a novelty. It's safe to say that Ernie Jasmine, known as the preacher for the prosecution, with his thundering voice and courtroom dramatics, might be a bit of a shock to a white jury in this area. It's unfair to call the jury racist. I don't know them personally, but but the general feeling of the time is that they were prejudiced. Only one of the jurors was black, and he would be the last holdout when it came time for the verdict. The vitriol between the flamboyant prosecutor and the equally audacious defense attorney was evident from day one. They had been at this dance for 2 years before the case came to trial. It's not that there was no love lost, it's that they hated each other. Charlie Ricketts started out by attacking the police. He claimed that they just weren't on their toes. I disagree. I do think they put all their eggs in the Mary Ann basket, but I think they truly felt they had him. And I disagree heartily with the verdict, but we'll get to that. At the height of irony and hypocrisy, Rickett claimed that Mary Ann Shore's motive for testifying was that, quote, if she couldn't have Mel Ignato, then no one could have Mel Ignato. No, Mr. Ricketts, that was Mel's motive to hurt, humiliate, and murder Brenda Sue Schaefer. Brenda had been ready to leave Mel, and he knew it. He planned this murder, he planned to torture her, and he planned for Mary Ann to participate to heighten the thrill. After all of the delays, a trial date was set for December 9th, 1991, 3 years after Brenda's murder. This was the worst time to try a man for murder. No one wants to sit through a gruesome murder trial during the holidays, and juries notoriously don't like to sentence men to death right before they celebrate the birth of Jesus. I don't think that Ernie Jasmine made a lot of errors, and I don't think that Charlie Rickett landed many blows, but there were problems. For one, though they did find her body, there was no physical evidence linking Mel Ignato to the body, not hair, not fingerprints, nor semen. But then there wouldn't be, since the body was not found for 15 months. The jury got really hung up on this point, and without other evidence, that would be understandable. Another problem is they never found the photographs Mary Ann claims she took. They had her eyewitness testimony, but the photographs would have supported her story, no matter how disturbing. And Mary Ann Shore did not make a good impression on the jury. She had put on weight, wore owlish eyeglasses, and an unfortunately short skirt, of which her lawyer later said he had not thought was that inappropriate, though in hindsight, the angles the jury and the press saw were pretty bad. What the jury was really reacting to was her demeanor. She told her story dispassionately, matter-of-factly, often while crossing her legs and showing a bit too much thigh, though I doubt she was even aware of it. Mary Ann Shore was not at all a sympathetic figure. I understand that. But I do believe she was forthcoming. It's just that the average person cannot understand a compliant victim of a sexual sadist. They don't understand the control Mel Ignato had over her. She did as she was told, which was mainly to take pictures. But she also wielded the fraternity paddle, and she admitted to penetrating Brenda with her finger at Mel's direction. That would be difficult for anyone to understand. They would obviously think she enjoyed it. And truthfully, to this day, we really can't know that she didn't. But everything she said would eventually be proven, just not at trial. Instead, the jury saw it the other way around, that she was obsessed with him, that Mary Ann was jealous of Brenda. Maybe she had killed her on her own. Another problem is the judge did not allow testimony from Brenda's friends and co-workers who she had confided in about her relationship with Mel. In what is called the dead man's rule or statute, witnesses are often not allowed to testify to these sort of conversations. It usually only applies in civil trials, where there is a possibility of monetary gain. This sort of testimony can be used in criminal trials as long as there is corroborating evidence. The fact that so many people could tell the same story of what Brenda had endured should have been enough. She had told her mother, her boss, her co-workers, her best friend, her brother's girlfriend, all about her relationship with Mel. Her best friend did testify to things she had seen and was infuriated that she couldn't tell all of it. But Judge Johnstone said he believed the dead man statute did not apply in this case. I'm not a lawyer, but I do believe there was more than enough corroboration to allow it into evidence. But that is just my layman's opinion. So without the photographs, without physical evidence linking Ignato, and without any background on their relationship, this jury just didn't really have the full picture. And probably the biggest problem again was the racial makeup of the jury, coupled with the timing of the trial. One of the jurors later complained on record about the one, quote, colored man on the jury that held things up. The jury has insisted over the years that race played no part, that Ernie Jasmine's skin color didn't cloud their judgment, but at least that one juror showed his bias openly. The 1990s wasn't so long ago that calling an African American colored wouldn't be racist. And there were two holdouts for convicting Mel Ignato. One was the black man, and another was a minister's wife. But the 10 other jurors just wanted to go home. They didn't believe that Marianne actually committed the murder, but they also thought the investigation was terrible. That is actually really unfair. The police worked tirelessly in this case under a lot of public pressure, and they had a lot of bad luck. But an almost all-white jury had a white lawyer screaming bad investigation, pounding home over and over again the lack of physical evidence linking Ignato, a white man. And then they had a black prosecutor, known for his preacher-like oratory styles, telling them to convict. In the end, they wore down the minister's wife and the lone African-American man. He later said he told them that Mel Ignato was guilty, but if they insisted on setting him free, then they could. It wouldn't be on his conscience. And then they bullied the minister's wife, who later never forgave herself for caving in. There had been 2 alternate jurors who were dismissed. One was openly saying she believed Ignato was guilty. Now obviously Ernie Jasmine didn't want to strike her, but if he didn't, he risked losing if there was an appeal. The other was a woman who had had a baby just 6 weeks before the trial. She had initially tried to stay off the jury, pleading that she didn't have a babysitter. But she worked it out and stuck it out until there were 2 deaths in her family within a week. She finally had to be excused, though she said by then that she was willing to bring her baby into the deliberations to see it through. She later said she would have voted to convict. It hurts to think that if they had at least just had that young mother, there would have at least been one more person who might have hung that jury. But they voted to acquit. The courtroom broke into chaos. The judge had been forewarned by one of the deputies guarding the jury room, and Ernie Jasmine could see it on his face. The Schaeffers saw how none of the jury looked at them when they filed in. It was unbelievable. Louisville, as a city, was incensed. Incredibly, even Judge Johnstone wrote a letter to Brenda's family apologizing for the outcome, which is highly unusual. He ended the letter, quote, "Whether in this world or another, one day justice will be done." And federal prosecutors now stepped in. They may not be able to try Ignato for murder with the double jeopardy statute, but they had other counts. They indicted him on 3 counts of perjury relating to his testimony at the grand jury, where he had insisted that Marianne Shore had never met Brenda Schaefer, where he had said he didn't know what happened to her engagement ring, and for suborning perjury for having Marianne lie to the grand jury. His federal trial faced many of the same delays as his criminal trial had. But for once, this worked out for investigators. They finally caught a damn break. Mel had deeded his home to his mother before the criminal trial so that it could not be seized in any later civil suits. But his mother died in the interim, and the deed reverted to his children, who promptly sold the house. In October of 1992, the new owners decided they wanted new carpeting. The old brown carpet was dated, and they were having new plush cream-colored carpeting installed. One of the contractors was pulling up the old carpeting when he found an air duct that had been completely covered by the carpet. The carpet was stretched so tight you couldn't even see an indentation. He looked into the vent and saw a plastic baggie full of jewelry and some black canisters with gray tops, the kind that holds film. The contractor did not know the history of the house, but he knew he needed to show the owner. The new owner, Judy Watkins, turned very pale as soon as she saw it and quietly asked, "Do you know who used to live here?" She had held onto a card from one of the FBI agents, a woman named Deirdre Fike. She immediately called and reported what she found. Within minutes, the house was swarming with FBI technicians, and now they worried again that Mel might run or even kill himself. They rushed the film to the lab and had Mel picked up at the same time. Once the film was developed, they saw everything that had been done to Brenda Schaefer. Every indignity, her pain and terror plain on her face. And the pictures matched every word of Marianne's testimony. They finally had him, but it was too late. He could not be tried again for murder. But they still brought him in. They could at least get him for perjury and stolen property. The important thing was to match him to the man in the pictures, even though you couldn't see his face. What they would be able to identify were moles and body hair. So they made Mel disrobe so they could take pictures under his very loud protests. I love that they made Mel Ignato strip in front of a woman and be photographed. It's not even 1% of the humiliation that Brenda suffered, but it's something. Okay, Mel, put your hands behind your head, elbows out, exactly how he had made Brenda pose in one of the pictures. It was the prisoner of war surrendering stance. Her face had been covered in tears, her eyes glazed with humiliation. And now they could, at the very damned least, make Mel Ignato pose for the cameras. And by asking him to stand in that pose, they subtly let him know they had the photographs. The color drained from his face. Another good part of this is Mel never saw those pictures of Brenda. The prosecutors would not give him the satisfaction. His sick obsession, his trophy, and he never got to see it. For once, delays in Mel's trial actually helped. If he had gone to court on the federal charges before the photos were found, things may have turned out very differently. But as it was, they were able to barter a deal, to save the Schaefer family from further torment, and to ensure that those photographs of Brenda Schaefer never made it into public record. No trial would at least avoid that final indignity. What happened to her was already on record. Her life was open to public scrutiny. Those pictures could never see the light of day. Mel Ignato agreed to a 97-month sentence for the 3 federal charges of perjury. That is only 8 years, but it was something. It sure as hell was better than nothing. And there was one caveat. Ignato had to admit on record that he murdered Brenda Schaefer. His exact words were, quote, "On September 24th, 1988, I did take Brenda Sue Schaefer over to Marianne Shore's house on Poplar Level Road, and I did physically and sexually abuse her, and I did murder her." There it was. After all these years, the devil had to admit what he did. Prosecutors wanted him to answer specific questions relating to the assault, but the judge wisely ruled that Ignato would answer those in writing, further sparing the family from more detail. He did, however, make him tell how he killed her. Ignato said, quote, "She died from having inhaled chloroform. She died peacefully." That last sentence burned through the courtroom as people cried out loud. Mike Schaefer jumped up and screamed, "Bullshit!" It was a final blow to her family that this monster claimed that she had died in peace. But at least it was done. He was shipped off to serve his time in a federal prison in Bradford, Pennsylvania. To the utter shock and dismay of prosecutors, Ignato got out 2 years early for time served. I'm not sure how they didn't know that this was part of the federal law, but even Mel Ignato's lawyer expressed surprise. It would seem that he could always play the system. With time served plus good behavior, he was released in December of 2006. On September 1st, 2008, Mel Ignato was found dead in his home. He was 70 years old. The neighbor who found his body said it appeared that Ignato had fallen, gotten a head wound, and then tried to make his way to the kitchen where there was a trail of blood, perhaps trying to get to a phone. But his body was found near his bedroom door as if he had gone back that way in confusion. The neighbor also described him as a sick and elderly man, alone and struggling for help when he apparently stumbled to his death. He said, quote, "I used to hear him all night, asking for Jesus to come and get him because he was in a lot of pain." Mike Ignato, Mel's son, admits he will probably go down as one of the most hated men in Louisville. You're damn straight. Mel Ignato may have spent his final days pleading with Jesus to help him, but ultimately the son of a bitch died alone. And I, for one, believe that there was a special place in hell waiting for him. Southern Fried True Crime is written and produced by me, Erica Kelley. The original graphic art is by Coley, and Southern Fried's original music is by Rob Harrison of Gamma Radio. Today marks my 1-year anniversary in podcasting, and I want to thank all of you for listening and supporting me. I am humbled and so grateful for your support. Special thanks to Arnold Brown, who suggested today's episode, and also to author Bob Hill, who wrote Double Jeopardy on Brenda's case, which was published in 1995. Though there is extensive coverage on this case online and even court documents, Mr. Hill's book was an incredible resource for my episode, and I highly recommend it for anyone interested in learning more about this horrific crime. If you're new to the show and you enjoyed what you heard, please tell a friend or rate and review on iTunes. You can also listen directly from Spreaker, my network online, or on their app. And I'm also on Stitcher, CastBox, and many other podcatchers. If you're interested in supporting the show, I have a Patreon page with many different rewards for different levels of donations. Or you can visit my website, southernfriedtruecrime.com, where you can make a one-time donation just by hitting the donate button. If you have any comments, corrections, or suggestions, you can email me at southernfriedtruecrime@gmail.com. I love hearing from you guys, and I'm always looking for new cases, so please feel free to reach out. I'm also all over social media. Just search the show name in your favorite platform if you'd like to connect with me there. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. Y'all take care.